Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, From Cyber Prevention to Coverage, What Business Owners and Leaders Need to Know. I am Tom Raminga, Chief Technology Officer at Technology Resource Advisors, a managed IT service and security provider based in the Third Ward. My co-presenter today is Nick Starr, Commercial Insurance Architect at Starr Insurance. TRA has been a Starr Insurance client since 2015. Our experience with Starr Insurance has been first class. The Starr team is extremely knowledgeable, friendly, quick to respond, and client focused. With that being said, let's dive into the content of today's discussion. Feel free to ask any questions during the presentation as we have team members standing by to answer your live chat questions. One of the main focus points that I discuss with many businesses when it comes to cyber prevention is the concept and requirement of layered security. But before we get into the layers and eventually some good technical and business quick tips, I want to cover some basic security topics first. First, security practices and tools should be the same across all systems. What I mean by this is that being able to leverage the same set of tools across computers that are Windows based, Apple based, or possibly even mobile helps provide a unified and standardized set of expectations and reports on how your environment is secured. Having a different tool set can lead to gaps and missed expectations that could possibly have been avoided. Next, security policies and practices should be verifiable. It is all too often that a check and balance is not established early on. At a minimum, some types of manual and accountable verification that all of those technologies, policies, or practices are doing what's expected. Next up, with mobile users being more and more commonplace every day, make sure that those security policies and technologies take into account that not everything is done within your office. You shouldn't need to sacrifice security simply because a user or device does not sit behind your company's firewall. Many businesses ask what defines good security or what should be in their security plan. I find that leveraging and working towards implementation of an established security framework such as NIST or CIS are incredibly helpful. Frameworks are often updated regularly to account for new threats or changes to existing controls that are just no longer effective. In addition, security frameworks help provide a scoring mechanism that makes it easier to focus on the more critical aspects or compare against industry averages for perspective. You may have heard this before, but be assured that security is never complete or done. At TRA, we evaluate almost daily new threats through a variety of sources. While you can't protect against everything, you must remain understanding that it'll never truly be solved. Staying on top of new trends, new vulnerabilities, understanding your true risks, plus prioritizing what is most critical in terms of availability of systems and your data to the business helps most organizations spend their time and their money in the right place. Having a firewall and antivirus on systems just isn't enough anymore. As you saw the title of this presentation, layering security is fundamental. But those layers then require checks and balances to verify their effectiveness. No single solution fixes everything, so organizations need to come to terms with the fact that there is no silver bullet and build their IT security by layering solutions with the expectation that new threats come out every day and something will slip through. Our goal is that if it slips through one layer, the next one will catch it and so on. Furthermore, ongoing reviews and vetting of those layers are critical to make sure you are using the best and most cost effective for your security solution stack. While layering is critical, it is also important to realize that you may need help beyond what you have internally. No single person can know everything, so layering with people and or partners provides similar end results. Again, it is a check and balance, and over the last several years, it has become very common for organizations to leverage external resources that provide focused guidance or experience that may be missing. Be cautious though, not all external vendors are created equal, and just like services and solutions, partners and internal assignments need to be vetted as well. Next, for perspective, 98% of all breaches occur through phishing email or similar scams. It is far easier to trick and hack the person than the gear. So while it is nearly impossible to run a business without employees, be aware that they are often your weakest link in your threat surface. Cybersecurity training is still very beneficial to train users how to better evaluate if messages are legitimate or not. Unfortunately, training alone will not protect an organization, even for the most diligent end user, just due to the increased sophistication over the years. Training should always be paired with additional layers to prevent what could be a quick and simple mistake from being a very costly one. Finally, never pay the ransom. Or, in other words, you should never be put in a place where you must pay the ransom. Unfortunately, you will never be 100% protected, and that one wrong clicked link could mean a huge ransom payout, loss of business, reputation, and potentially even closing one's doors. Live by the idea that your number one goal is to never have to pay a ransom to restore your business. This is far more useful than attempting to never have a security incident. If you layer in backwards, starting at recovery and working towards prevention and the reduction of lost productivity, you should be able to feel more and more confident in the security of your business. All right, let's get into the 5 layers that really help protect organizations with their current security landscape as it sits today. This is by no means a complete list of every layer that can be applied to an organization. There are also layers that are requirements for organizations that may have compliance requirements for themselves or passed on from their own clients. Keep in mind, most bad actors are motivated by financial gain. So, sophistication and effort typically being thrown at an organization is often dictated by what is known of the value of the data within that organization. Unless you are a very well known and wealthy organization, most attacks are not because a bad actor specifically targeted your organization. SMB attacks are rarely personal, so put up enough stumbling blocks, and most move on to an easier target. I will warn you, all of these layers are technically focused. In addition, many of these layers have a number of vendors that provide excellent solutions. So, this is not a who's who list, but more of a high level understanding of where you should cost effectively invest to improve your organization's security posture. When asked, what do I need? These are the core layers that most, if not all, organizations should have a strong contender in their corner covering them. If your organization can't speak highly or at all for any of these layers, I would immediately start and investigate with your staff or partners to find the right one that fits in your organization. TRA has spent years cultivating and vetting a list of trusted partners that we bring to our clients, and we don't stop there. Every solution is reevaluated on a regular basis to make sure they still perform at a very high level and at a reasonable cost. Your own internal team or partner should be doing the same. So, without further ado, let's jump into them. Layer 1. As mentioned, 98% of breaches come through email. This typically comes across as some email designed to trick a user into clicking a link. That link may be in the email itself or in an attachment. Email security is a very mature solution set and has been around for 20 plus years. Even for mature solution sets. A more recent improvement, though, has been around targeting phishing specifically and the identification of impersonation scams such as CEO or CFO type fraud. These newer features look at the natural language combined with the spelling, grammar, etc. to better identify the phish. In addition, being able to rewrite links in emails or attachments for cloud based live evaluation means even if a user does click a link, you have a first line of prevention should that email still arrive in the inbox and the user click that malicious link. Some of these anti phishing solutions include some pretty amazing features that highlight and flag possible phishing anomalies in emails received. These are the same anomalies people are told to look at in security awareness training. Look closely at domain spelling, odd requests from known people, odd attachments, time sensitive but unverifiable requests, etc. These highlighted anomalies are flagged and presented right within the email the user receives. This both trains the user but forces the user to acknowledge those security anomalies that can be missed by training alone. Finally, we have seen major developments in live monitoring for account takeover. By identifying where accounts are being logged in from normally and building a profile when an account is logged in from a high risk location such as Russia, China, North Korea, etc., or the account is simultaneously logged in from multiple geographically diverse locations, or even an odd frequency of these logins, these are flagged to the user's IT team or partner and is alerted to investigate a possible account takeover. Next, layer 2, security awareness training. This is a pretty common layer that you may already be doing. We have found that the best and most viewed trainings, though, are between 3 to 7 minutes long. In addition, finding videos that are entertaining, relevant, and unique. Watching the same video over and over, or the 45-minute overall IT security videos are just not effective for 99% of people. The thoughtfulness should be applied to the testing of your users with simulated phishing. This is where we send users our own individualized phishing emails and attempt to trick the users ourselves. The goal is to identify if some users need additional training or discussions on how costly a mistake could be. Our biggest issue we often see here is that the phishing emails are just not believable, i.e., requests for password changes from services that you just don't use. Some of the most entertaining are the Google Reset Gmail passwords, but your business uses Office 365. We recommend spending a little bit of time vetting the tests to make sure that they are valid and not super easy to spot. This goes a long way with making them a true representation of your business risk. Our next layer is computer account monitoring and good password hygiene. In this day and age, most services and access still require a password. Good password hygiene typically consists of different passwords for every different service, solution, or device they may use, and especially for anything that may contain sensitive information. In addition, these passwords must follow complexity requirements and be very difficult to guess, i.e., not just changing the number at the end. Finally, these passwords should be changed on regular intervals for the most sensitive of accounts. Computer account monitoring is typically done by monitoring your Active Directory for logins, logouts, failures, and changes, authorized or not. Special considerations and alerting should be employed for highly sensitive groups like domain administrators, or for very sensitive computers like ones dedicated to banking or financial purposes. In addition, if a solution automatically builds user profiles based on their login behavior, alerts can be generated when anomalies like odd times or logging into uncommon systems are observed. Furthermore, monitoring your domains in the dark web helps identify credentials that may have been compromised in the past. Alerting the users that a password is floating around in the dark web allows them to change any account that uses that password. This is why using unique passwords at different sites helps when one is exposed, only needing to change the one versus 30. Next, we have high end antivirus, also known as Next Gen AV or Endpoint Detection and Response. I try to stay away from terms like Next Gen AV because every new generation is technically next gen. We typically look at antivirus in two categories: traditional antivirus, which blocks known bad threats, and then there's endpoint detection and response, aka EDR. EDR is designed from the ground up to include everything within traditional AV, but also provides protection from unknown bad threats. EDR focuses on classifying every application on the user system and profiling what every application typically does. This is especially helpful with new forms of threats such as browser hijacking or fileless malware. Both often completely bypass traditional antivirus. With upwards of 100,000 new forms of malware being released daily, it is nearly impossible for traditional antivirus to keep up with its primary update method known as virus signatures. EDR instead classifies an application already running on your machine and builds a profile of what it typically does. It does this process with every single process, service, and application on a system. This is why an EDR is able to prevent built in processes or applications from being hijacked or infected with malware through a link. Finally, EDR solutions more often includes a host of additional services that target multiple other threat vectors as well. This helps provide a very complete package of security at the end user level. This is also the last line of defense when it comes to prevention and is critical to avoid that final layer. Unfortunately, if your organization is at layer 5, disaster recovery, business continuity, and offsite backup, this layer means that you've been breached. You likely have some amount of data loss, systems are encrypted, and or systems are no longer functioning for users. Likely, your business and users are in a reduced or crippled state. In addition, depending on what the organization has implemented, there may also be varying degrees of data loss and questions on if paying a ransom may be the path of recovery. I would suggest that while offsite backup is listed by name, it really is a poor option to recover your business and is marginally better than paying an actual ransom. The focus, though, should really be on the solutions that are built as disaster recovery or business continuity systems. Backup becomes an inherited and natural benefit of DRBC solutions. Disaster recovery and business continuity, though, do require some thoughtful investigation to determine what is the right amount of coverage and cost. To find the right fit before you get to this point, you need to identify three core items: your RTO, your RPO, and your system priorities. RTO is your return time objective, i.e., how long can you be down for? RPO is your return point objective. How far back in time would be acceptable loss? Finally, what data, systems, and access need to be recovered first and what considerations need to be accounted for? Unfortunately, cost often rises with either RTO and or RPO increases. This is why it is recommended to work backwards and determine what needs to come up first, second, third, etc. How quickly does each of those need to come up, and how much data loss for each is tolerable? Keep in mind the soft costs, such as downed employee productivity, and not just what a ransom or new server hardware would cost in the event of a physical disaster. We typically see highly transactional servers, i.e., databases, or major file servers around 1 to 4 hours of acceptable data loss, with many of these critical business services being online in that same time window. Shorter windows may be available, but the cost may be prohibitive. So, making sure expectations are clearly communicated is critical. Finally, as mentioned previously, a check is required. Organizations should be testing the solution on a regular basis. Since this is likely an organization's last line of defense, it should not be left to chance or simple successful backup emails. Running through a true disaster recovery test when you're not in an actual disaster provides critical insight into aspects you may have never considered and could be addressed before an actual need. All right, so moving on. I just wanted to touch on a few technical tips that you or your IT group should be discussing as low hanging fruit. These are all relatively easy to implement and verify. Many can be enforced very easily, providing peace of mind for many business owners. Let's start with complex passwords. It's a very good basic starting point. This is going to be a password that contains both an uppercase, lowercase letters, potentially numbers, as well as special characters, exclamation points, etc. For this, we typically recommend over 10 characters, although 12 is always better. Really, any number is good. Just try to keep it above 8 because there are a lot of requirements out there that put 8 as the bare minimum. Next, passphrases. To help with complex passwords, I always recommend utilizing passphrases instead of random characters. Utilizing a few real but random words, combining them, you're still able to utilize a mix of symbols or numbers to satisfy those complex requirements. The human brain just does a better job at recalling whole words versus randomized characters. On to password rotation. So, changing passwords on regular intervals helps prevent compromised passwords from remaining powerful as they get exposed either through no fault of your own or by accident. Next, utilizing a password manager. This also goes with that complex passwords as well as the rotations. A password manager helps where the human brain fails. It's a secure location that allows you to keep hundreds or thousands of unrelated passwords together for quick and easy access. Even for passwords that potentially you're only going to or utilizing with years in between actual use. Next, it's always advisable to review and reduce privileged accounts. Making sure review is done regularly on high level administrative accounts and groups. If you don't invest in a solution to alert you to changes, at least you can regularly confirm this gap. Signing into the server, reviewing who are the members on a regular basis will go a long way. Separate admin and user accounts. Just because you may be a system administrator, it does not mean that everything you do on a system requires you to be an administrator 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If your account is somehow compromised while you're logged in as an admin, then they are also an admin. If you are compromised as a general user, then you're limiting the damage that they can really do. This has been really a common practice dating back dozens and dozens of years, dating back all the way to the Unix days. And finally, committing to a framework. Frameworks exist to help organizations and industries follow standardized recommendations that have been proven to help secure environments. Know if your industry has a compliance requirement like the HIPAA High Tech Act or NIST 800 171, DFARS, or FINRA. If you don't have a compliance requirement, the NIST CSF is a great general framework to follow. Finally, to wrap things up, I just wanted to share a few good business process tips that all organizations should consider. These are not really technical, but just good practice. First, verbal confirmation via outbound call to a trusted number and contact to verify the transfer of money to any bank account. This is there just to make sure that you have a process in place should a request come in to transfer money, that you are calling a number that you know to be good with a contact that has been verified before actually initiating that transfer. Next, that verbal confirmation via an outbound phone call to a trusted number and source to verify, the validity of a surprise purchase order, or an abnormal or change to a shipping address. This is to empower and allow your users that may be accepting orders or shipping out merchandise to make sure that they're sending it to the correct people, that they're not getting scammed in that manner. And again, the focus here is not necessarily to call on a number that is provided in an email, but actually to that trusted number, to that trusted source person for that verification. And finally, that verbal confirmation again via an outbound phone call to a trusted number and contact to verify any out of the ordinary monetary transactions. This is typically seen as the email that comes in requesting, I need gift cards sent or put on a desk or mailed out to me. These are also typically tied to requests saying, don't contact me, I'm just too busy or I'm in a meeting, trying to prevent that verification. So, again, anytime there is any kind of a monetary transaction, and not just, again, as we talked about in the first one, to a bank account, really with anything, gift cards included, just verifying and making sure that employees are contacting the user appropriately to, again, that trusted number and contact. Thank you again for your time today. To learn more about how TRA might be able to assist with your IT and cybersecurity needs, please feel free to reach out to myself or Jason Schmidt, our CEO. We're going to switch gears now and hand over to Nick Starr with Starr Insurance to discuss cyber coverage strategies. With the current security landscape being extremely treacherous, having the correct coverage and insurance options in place are so critical for businesses in the unfortunate event of a breach. So, without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Nick. Thank you again.
Thanks, Technology Resource Advisors, for the excellent and very relevant information. TRA does a fantastic job, so I would highly encourage everyone to connect with them to discuss your organizational needs. So, switching gears, hi everyone, and thank you for attending our Cyber Risk webinar. My name is Nick Starr, Director of Agency Advancement and Commercial Insurance Architect at the Starr Group. I am certain this is everyone's highlight of the day, and you are all at your computers 30 minutes early, giddy and excited to get started digging into the world of cyber insurance. The feeling is mutual. But joking aside, prevention is absolutely key today. And what we're going to be talking about, believe it or not, threatens business more than even our recent pandemic. A cyber attack is no longer a question of if, it's a question of when. Attacks are happening at an alarming rate with outrageous loss numbers, and it is truly the Wild West of our industry. The scariest thing about it is that hackers and fraudsters continue to evolve and get smarter as we become more technology driven. Make sure you have preventative measures in place, but at the same time, it's extremely important to have the proper cyber policy in place to catch everything that falls through. And that is exactly what I'm here to talk with you about today in this second section. Although we're keeping this short and sweet, you all should walk away with a much better understanding of what to look for in a proper cyber policy. We could literally spend a week on this subject matter, but I'm going to be touching on just the main points and talk briefly about the impact from the COVID-19 saga. Throughout the presentation, I will be available to answer questions via the chat. It is just me, so depending on the volume, I may not be able to get to everyone. Therefore, whether you have a question now or after, I encourage you to take down my contact information and reach out when convenient. I'm happy to be a resource and assist. So, for starters, I wanted to start by sharing some recent cyber statistics with you that I feel are impactful. My intent is not to use these as a scare tactic, but to make you aware of how truly volatile cyber attacks are becoming. So just to read through these, 17,700 is lost every minute due to phishing attacks. 63% of companies said their data was potentially compromised within the last 12 months. Over 75% of the healthcare industry has been infected with malware over the last year. The average cost of a data breach is $3.92 million as of 2019. Crazy but true, cybercrime is becoming more profitable than a legal drug trade. There is a hacker attack every 39 seconds. 43% of cyber attacks target small business. 95% of cybersecurity breaches are due to human error. Most companies take nearly 6 months to detect a data breach, even major companies. Here's where you can really see the impact. I recently got my hands on the 2019 Internet Crime Report from the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center, and the 2019 numbers are staggering. Top numbers are the complaints, and bottom numbers are the amount of total losses, and this shows you how we've been trending since 2015. 1,707,618 total complaints with 10.2 billion total losses over the last 5-year sample size. To no surprise, 2019 has been the most volatile year yet. This is a portrayal of how quickly this risk is moving relative to our adaptation of technology. Specialists predict this trend will only continue upward. Here's the scariest part. The FBI suggests that only 15% of victims report their crimes to law enforcement. This is primarily to avoid reputational harm and large payouts, which is assuming they're even aware of a cyber attack, which again, many organizations are completely oblivious for roughly the first 6 months. So again, those statistics that you see via the graph are portraying only 15% of reported complaints. So I wanted to point out some other key takeaways from the 2019 Internet Crime Report. As seen on the prior page, 2019 had 467,361 cyber complaints with reports losses exceeding 3.5 million, which suggests there are 1,200 complaints per day. The most common complaints are phishing, non-payment, non-delivery, extortion, and personal data breach. I unfortunately don't expect many of you to be shocked by this next variable, but the most victimized age group is 60 and above. I also found it interesting that the second most victimized age group was actually 30 to 39. Let's take a look from a geographic perspective. As you can see there, Wisconsin is ranked the 20th with just over 600 counts and total losses of over 21 million. Second, Illinois, you can see 9th count, over 10,000 complaints with over 100 million in losses. Indiana's right there as well, listed at 10th. You've got Ohio at 12th, and what's really important to look at with Ohio is, although they're 12th for the count of complaints, look at their losses, 264 million. That's incredible. And then Michigan, 15th. So 5 Midwest states in the top 20. Can you guess what the top 3 states are? You got California coming in at number 1, just over 50,000 complaints, over $500,000 of losses. Florida, number 2, 27,000 complaints, just under 300 million of losses. And third is Texas, close to Florida from a count perspective, but losses a little bit less, over 200 million. So what is cyber insurance? At its core purpose, cyber insurance is built to protect your business against the financial loss resulting from a range of cyber threats and exposures. We're going to dig much deeper into all the variables listed here, but I wanted to provide this brief summary to portray the basic makeup of what you want your cyber policy to provide and to get you to start thinking about all of the exposures and expenses that can arise with a single cyber loss to your organization and industry. All right, so if there is one thing you can take away from my portion of today's webinar, this is it. Not all cyber coverage is created equal. Just because you see cyber coverage on your policy doesn't mean it's built correctly and providing the necessary coverage you expect it to. The breakdown provided on the previous slide is just scratching the surface. There are very specific coverages and sublimits broken down within each of those variables. So every company has adapted a cyber policy to some degree, some extent, but majority only provide a handful of the coverages realistically needed to be fully covered. Have you ever been to a restaurant that has a menu with like 15 pages of food? There's no way it can all be the best or even decent for that matter. The same concept exists here, folks. Majority of the primary, property, and casualty carriers in the market focus on so many avenues, we find they are constantly playing catch up when it comes to cyber. And frankly, to their defense, the reason that is because it's constantly evolving, becoming more volatile as hackers and fraudsters get smarter and our lives become more technology driven. The industry as a whole is sprinting to keep up with the now changing cyber risks. Now throw in the workplace shift of employees working from home on personal devices that don't have the same protection the corporate electronics did, but access the same information. So, what is the solution? First, there are select carriers that specialize in cyber and only cyber, or carriers that have a specialized cyber division and a separate cyber product. These are the carriers you typically have to be using to get a full cyber policy. If you find your cyber coverage as an endorsement under your general liability policy or an add in anywhere within your primary package, then it is more than likely insufficient and very limited. Again, you typically want your cyber coverage as a standalone policy. Either way, the solution is carefully reading and understanding the policy, looking for key variables, and having a detailed discussion with your agent. Let's talk about some of these key variables. So we're going to get granular with some coverages you want to ensure are present in your cyber policy. Above is a quick summary of these key coverages we're about to walk through. I'll go through them individually, provide a definition, but also deliver a claim scenario wherein that coverage would be used. Let's get started. For starters, we've got security breach, notification, and remediation expenses coverage. This is reimbursement coverage for fees, costs, and expenses incurred and paid by you, the insured, due to a security breach pertaining to unauthorized access to confidential information of either your own company data and the information of others, i.e., your clients, vendors, consultants, and basically any third party information stored in your system. So, this is one of the coverages you want to ensure is covered on both a first party and third party basis. So, from a claim perspective, a skilled cyber criminal hacks into your company's internal processing system, names, addresses, and credit card information for over 50,000 of your members are captured out of the system. Expenses will likely include hiring a breach response firm to find the cause of the breach, assisting with notice requirements and expenses, providing credit monitoring, and a call center for impacted individuals. Data breach is one of the most frequent cyber occurrences in the industry today. You've seen this with Target and a number of the other large name companies. Crisis management and service expenses coverage. This is going to be your reimbursement coverage for fees, costs, or expenses incurred in retaining a public relations consultant or crisis management firm. It can also assist in planning or executing your public relations campaign to mitigate any actual or potential negative publicity generated from loss. So, as another example, your chief customer service chief customer service officer has her laptop stolen. The laptop contains over 100,000 client records, including their personal contact information. Expenses will likely include hiring a public relations firm to restore client confidence or to mitigate negative publicity generated from the incident. All right, another important one, business interruption and additional expenses coverage. So this extends coverage for loss of income and additional expenses due to a computer system disruption caused by a virus or unauthorized targeted computer attack. For example, your organization's server is infected by a severe virus, and as a result, your ordering website is not available for an extended period. This coverage will reimburse the net proceeds that would have been earned or net losses that would have been avoided directly due to computer system disruption. This is also offered on a contingent level. So this is coverage for your business interruption loss and additional expenses directly related to a disruption caused by a virus or other unauthorized computer attack to an IT provider's computer system or any outsourced provider's computer system. So, for example, your outsourced provider or IT provider's network is the victim of a distributed denial of service attack. As a result, they're unable to deliver necessary parts or process customer transactions, resulting in your business interruption to your business. Then we've got extortion expense coverage. So, coverage for money you pay due to threats made regarding intent to sell or disclose information about your customers, initiate an intentional attack on your computer communications network, destroy data, or other covered threats against you. We're also seeing this directed at manufacturers where the hacker actually takes control of the equipment until the ransom is paid. So, for example, you receive a series of notes which threaten to hack into your customer database and disclose all of the contact information to the general public. This coverage can include money or securities paid to the extortionist. Computer program and electronic data restoration expenses coverage. So this is going to be your coverage for expenses incurred to restore, replace, or reproduce damaged or destroyed computer programs, software, or other electronic data stored within your computer or communications network, which is directly due to a computer violation. For example, computer virus damages your operating system software and data. This coverage will reimburse costs for repair and restoration of your computer programs and electronic data. Computer fraud coverage. So this is coverage for loss of money, securities, or other property directly due to unauthorized and fraudulent entry of data or computer instructions. For an example, an organized crime ring gains unauthorized access to your accounts payable in your computer system and alters the bank routing information on outgoing payments. The result, 1 million transferred to the crime ring's account. This coverage reimburses for the direct loss of money, securities, or other property. All right, cyber versus cyber crime policies. So most would initially react in saying, aren't all cyber attacks considered cyber crime? The answer is actually no. There is an important distinction between the two. So, cybercrime policies cover the direct loss of your funds, whether through malfeasance, employee dishonesty, or social engineering, whereas cyber policies cover economic damages arising through a failure of network security or privacy controls, which may cause indirect losses. So, the three listed bullet points above are the most common cybercrime exposures slash coverages. What's extremely important to note is that if you purchase what appears to be a full cyber policy, as referenced earlier in the presentation, it still may be missing these important cybercrime coverages because these technically are not considered cyber coverages in the eyes of many carriers. They're actually considered crime coverages. Therefore, in many situations, you have to purchase a full cyber policy in addition to a full crime policy to check all of these boxes. Although there's definitely benefits to having both full cyber and crime policies, for the sake of our cyber discussion, I'm going to suggest confirming that your provider is including these very important cybercrime coverages, which almost every specialty cyber insurer today will to some extent. They may not be full policy limits, especially social engineering, but they should provide at least a sublimit. So, what is social engineering? This is coverage for loss of money or securities due to a person impersonating another and fraudulently providing instructions to transfer funds. For an example, an employee in the Your Accounts Payable department receives an email from an established vendor changing the vendor's banking instructions. The employee relies upon the fraudulent email instruction and wires $100,000 from the insured's bank account to the fraudster. The insured discovers the fraud when the real vendor contacts the insured requesting payment. This coverage reimburses funds that were fraudulently transferred. Being on the front lines, this exposure has been definitely one of the most volatile as of recent. These fraudsters are getting incredible at disguising themselves as the trusted vendor they claim to be. They'll install spyware where they monitor details such as voice inflection, cadence, keystrokes, even your schedule, and wait for the opportune moment to strike. For this reason, it's really important to have two-step authentication procedures in place and training for anyone that can move money within your organization. All right, funds transfer fraud. So this is coverage for loss of money or securities due to fraudulent transfer instructions to a financial institution. So you receive an email that appears to be from your bank, but it's not. Your employee opens the email, which activates a computer virus called a Trojan horse that reads keystrokes. The perpetrator uses this means to obtain banking and password information and initiates a fraudulent electronic wire transfer from your bank account. This coverage reimburses funds that were fraudulently transferred. And then finally, telecommunications theft coverage. This covers the amounts charged by a telephone service provider resulting from an unauthorized person accessing or using an insured's telephone system. For example, an unknown third party gains unauthorized access to the insured's telephone system and uses the system to incur $50,000 in international charges. The insured discovers the loss when it receives its monthly statement from its telephone provider containing the fraudulent charges. The fraudulent charges would be reimbursed. A few other coverages to quickly note that you should find in your cyber policy. The first is legal fees. Typically, after a breach or other cyber attack, legal actions can be taken, suing over failure to take reasonable security measures to protect data or to respond as a prudent person would. And then one of the larger ones is actually PCI fines. These can be devastating. So PCI stands for Payment Card Industry, and compliance is mandated by credit card companies to help ensure the security of credit card transactions in the payment industry. So compliance is developed and managed by PCI Security Standards Council. So if determined that upon an attack you are not PCI compliant, fines can actually start around 5 to 10,000 per month and go upwards of 100 to $500,000 per month, depending on the PCI procedures you've taken to protect your customers' payment information. This can actually be one of the larger expenses you incur with a cyber attack. So what's important to note here is that first, you have to have these coverages included in your policy, as they're not always included. So you want to confirm that. Secondly, are these coverages included up to your policy limit, or are they a separate sublimit? By identifying this, you can ensure the limit is going to be sufficient for your needs. All right, we've talked about coverages. Let's talk about limits. So, unfortunately, there's really no black and white guide regarding the amount of cyber insurance an organization should carry. Every organization is different, has different exposures, carries different data, has different payment methods, different security measures. Regardless, I typically am recommending at least $1 million limit for a majority of my clients today. What I find absolutely shocking is that actually, when reviewing prospective clients, I'm on average finding limits that range anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000, if any coverage at all. To be clear, if you haven't figured out my messaging this far, this is not enough coverage. So, to help you determine proper limits, there are some good questions you can ask yourself. How deep are your organization's pockets? How is your data stored? Is it encrypted at rest? Who has access to the data? How is data compartmentalized from other systems? Who can move money within the organization? Do you have a two-step authentication plan in place when moving money? What other preventative measures do you have in place? Do you work with outside consultants that have access to your personal data? How many records does your system hold at one time? Benchmarking can be another way to determine limits. The internet is inundated with claim examples from companies of every size. By reading through a number of actual claims can give you some semblance of clarity. But realistically, the best way to go about this is to work with your broker. You're paying them to be proactive and help you determine the coverage necessary for your potential risk. Of course, no one understands your business like you, but they should be able to help walk you in the right direction with their professional understanding of these coverages relative to your organization exposures. One other thing to note, given the volatility of cyber claims today, you can expect the retention, which is another word for deductible, of these policies on average to be $25,000. This depends on sales, size, security, etc. You might get away with 10K, but anticipate these to be high. All right, let's talk about the workplace shift since that's extremely relevant. How has the work from home mandate impacted the cyber environment? Well, for starters, if you have a cyber policy, does it even cover employees on a personal device? In many situations, coverage is limited to devices owned or leased by the insured. So while employees are at home on their personal devices, you want to confirm. So check the definition of your computer systems within your policy. All right, some other COVID-19 exposures. There's been a huge surge in attempted cyber attacks since the COVID-19 saga began. An organization's cyber priority has been bumped down a few levels because of cash position concerns. So, employees working from home also may not be working from a secure VPN system or subject to the same dual factor authentication when in an office setting. So, as mentioned earlier, fraudsters are exploiting the situation by creating fake relief websites. So, be very, very cautious. Cyber criminals are starting to focus on quality, not quantity, as well, and carefully selecting senior managers and C suite executives who have access to the company's bank accounts and can authorize payments. Also, phishing scams campaign around scare tactics while people are at their most vulnerable. For example, a recent scam told victims they had come into contact with a friend, colleague, or family member who had been infected with the coronavirus. The email instructs its victims to download an attachment and then go to the hospital. Of course, clicking on the link downloads a malicious program. The email appeared to come from a legitimate hospital as well. So, again, they're getting very, very good with these. Another very important variable to portray is that your commercial cyber policy does not cover you personally. The commercial cyber policy was created to respond to issues resulting from your business activity, not your personal use. Therefore, it is important you inquire about this coverage with your homeowner's insurer, as many companies are beginning to adopt cyber specific coverages. Personal cyber coverage consists of the following: cyber attack coverage, so protecting you against financial consequences of personal online attacks, also called cyberbullying. Cyber extortion, threaten to release sensitive personal data or prevent access to technology devices. Cyber financial loss from fraud coverage, identity theft, stolen bank funds, fraudulent use of credit cards. These items can actually be included in the identity theft coverage that most carriers offer today, but ID theft alone does not protect against the wider range of risks posed by cybersecurity threats. You've got data restoration, so expenses incurred by a service provider in recovering lost data after a cyber attack or extortion. And then crisis management, so expenses incurred by a service provider to minimize the damage to the covered policyholder's reputation after a cyber attack or extortion. This is a new shift in the personal insurance world, so you are typically only going to find personal insurers max limits of about 15 to 25,000, assuming they offer cyber coverage at all. It's definitely good to have something, but as business owners, you're well aware that your bullseye again is larger than the average individual. As of now, you will need to seek out high value home carriers to get the limits you realistically should have. So, in conclusion, a cyber attack again is no longer a question of if, but when. You are at risk regardless the size of your organization. Something you saw earlier in a statistic: 43% of cyber attacks are directed at small business. Many small businesses feel that they're protected because they're not a large bullseye, but quite the opposite. They see you as having very low defenses and see you as being easy targets. With the extreme rising frequency of attacks, the time to take the necessary preventative action is right now, especially while we are at our most vulnerable with the COVID-19 crisis. So, pricing is actually still very obtainable relative to the coverage that this provides. But given the claim frequency and increased volatility, it is absolutely beginning to harden. I would strongly recommend starting to build your experience profile with a cyber insurer to avoid heavy increases in pricing down the road. By having an experience profile, an argument can be made to leverage pricing rather than being subject to the future new business rates that will continue to increase for all new business accounts. So, I've got a challenge for all of you, and that would be to spend 15 to 30 minutes digging into your current cyber policy. Do you have one? What are the limits? Does it include all the necessary coverage mentioned today? Does it cover remote employees? Those 15 to 30 minutes could be all that it takes to identify a poorly built cyber policy and take the necessary actions to avoid a large financial cyber hit in the future. All right, that concludes our presentation. Thank you again for joining us today, truly. As mentioned, we are here to be a resource. If you have any questions whatsoever, do not hesitate to reach out. My contact information is right here. I'd also be happy to provide a complimentary evaluation of your current cyber policy. All the agents at the Star Group, myself included, have access to multiple full cyber programs and are heavily educated on the variables we discussed today. We are always ready to assist. So stay safe, healthy, and have a great rest of your week. Take care.